Is going to talk about, actually we had a question about that from the man from Montreal here, about the ethical issues of dealing with robots and artificial intelligence. We're going to talk about that first, and then the second panel discussion we're going to talk about is regulatory issues in dealing with AI. So one right after the other, and then we're going to break for lunch. So if I could I get our panelists for the ethical issues, if they could come up on stage. And let's begin our talk. I think they're all here. Let's see, let me get the names right. Jochen Leidner, Michal Kosinski, and Friederike Holtheuner. Are you guys all here? Come on.
Next, you're going to be on camera.
Hi, good morning, hi. Oh, you're all here, good, hi. Hey, good to see you. Hi. You guys just take a seat. And what we do here usually is just ask each of you to introduce yourself so that everyone knows who you are, and maybe give a little statement about what you think is important right now in the discussion of ethical issues with AI. I'll start with you.
Hi, my name is
Jochen
Leidner.
Okay.
So I'm Director of Research at Thomson Reuters. That's the parent company of the Reuters News organization. I direct its London R&D team, which conducts applied research for professional areas like news, finance, legal, tax, accounting, basically all areas that Thomson Reuters is involved in.
Yep.
And we've got quite a number of scientists, over 100 in various locations around the world, doing artificial intelligence research. And we want to do that right, so we also include the ethics research.
Wait, are you talking about ethics research in the reporting of the issue, or actually in your daily operations?
We also conduct actual research in ethics, covering our own application domains.
Okay.
So we publish papers about the ethics of the technology that we also conduct research on.
Okay.
I think it's the right way of working.
Excellent.
So my background is computer science and computational linguistics.
Okay, excellent.
I'm Michal Kosinski. I'm an assistant professor of organizational behavior at Stanford Graduate School of Business. I'm a psychologist, but also data scientist, so a computational psychologist, I guess. My research focuses on trying to understand humans better through the lenses of digital footprints that we are leaving behind while using the internet and other digital products and services. And now, in my research, I would focus both on the advantages of technologies like that, so not only what we can learn about people based on the footprints that we are leaving behind, but also how we can use this knowledge to improve the products and services and basically our experience, both when using digital products, but also in life. But on the other hand, of course, my research has many implications for privacy. So some of the algorithms can be used both for improving our lives as well as making them potentially more risky or miserable.
Okay.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm Friederike Holtheuner, and I work for Privacy International. We're an international civil liberties organization with partners in over 20 countries. And we focus on the civil liberties or fundamental rights implications of emergent technologies. So that is anything from government surveillance in Pakistan to the US, to artificial intelligence and the Internet of Things.
So, well, welcome to all of you. What would you say, and I'll start with you, Friederike, what's the biggest ethical issue right now confronting the world in connection with AI?
I think ethics of AI has to begin with asking the right questions. And a lot of times debate around ethics and AI focus on very specific applications, like the trolley problems in cars. Should the car, when confronted with an accident, turn left or right? And I think this focus on autonomous vehicles underestimates that we have AI applications permeate very kinds of domains in life, anything from devices, platforms, and networks. And ultimately, wherever we use large data sets and apply intelligence or smartness to them, we're faced with the very same kinds of problems. And for me, the biggest dilemma is that it doesn't make sense to compare artificial intelligence to human intelligence, because even when machines do something very similar to humans, just because we have a much larger scale, the consequences are radically different. And the biggest challenges are a lot of times artificial intelligence systems are so complex that they're ultimately non-predictable.
But are there any ethical issues, though, for humans? I mean, a lot of people, I was taking some questions earlier from people, and one thing that kept coming up was, well, why would there be ethical issues? We're talking about machines.
I think that the main difference here is basically that when you talk about any other machine really that humanity built before AI, I think what applies is that the machine is morally neutral. So, a knife is not bad in its own right. It's just the user of the knife that can use it either for cutting bread or hurting other people. But now this thinking completely changes when we think about AI. So AI can be deployed to achieve a morally positive or morally neutral goal, and yet do it in a way that is not morally neutral. And I think that there's plenty of examples that we actually can already see around. Think about AI that is running news feeds at Facebook. And now, don't take me wrong, I love Facebook, I love newsfeed, my newsfeed, and I check it every morning, perhaps even for too long, if I'm to be frank. But what happens there is that basically this AI was set up to maximize users' enjoyment, right? So which is kind of a morally positive or maybe morally neutral goal at the worst. But now this AI, in the process of discovering how to satisfy the users, may come up with ways of solving this problem that are not morally neutral. Like it can notice, for instance, that if it shows to users fake stories or stories that are, contain some elements of hatred or racial hatred, for instance, then people are very much excited about it. They spend a lot of time clicking and reading it and sharing it with friends and saying how outrageous that is. And from the point of view of AI, this is great. I just now have all of those users that spend a lot of time using Facebook and watching my adverts. So we have here a very good example where kind of AI was unleashed to do something positive, but ended up achieving its goal in a negative way.
Well, would you really say it's positive? The algorithm is there. Obviously, they want us to feel good reading the news feed, but they also want us to stay there as long as possible because that increases our exposure to advertising, right? And so isn't that really, at the end of the day, isn't that the real reason for the algorithm, is to expose my eyes to as many advertisements as possible?
I think it's the first price to pay for an amazing experience, right? Like, again, like if you are not paying for something, it's you who is the product. And Facebook is basically giving us an amazing social network, amazing platform to communicate with friends. And, I, for one, just love using it. And then I'm aware that I'm paying for it by watching on adverts, and I try not to click on them so often.
Is that what is happening? Is that how we pay for the experience?
So I think that's a big difference in the consumer world, as opposed to the world of professionals that we focus on. In the consumer world, there is a tendency to want people's data because it can be monetized for advertising, and it's very valuable. The more I know about you, the better I can target my ads.
Right.
And people are sort of willing to give away rather more of their own data, and I think there's basically the opinion is that people say, well, I have nothing to hide, I'm just using this, and they don't realize over years, what you can do with that data in terms of predicting, people's religion, predicting people's orientations. People would be quite surprised. So there's the famous Target example, where people did data mining of purchase transactions, and Target, the US supermarket chain, was able to predict that a certain lady at 16 years old was pregnant before her father knew about it, and he called in to complain. You can read about that story on the internet, so I'll not go into details. But I think we cannot actually assess the impact of the data we give away, and that's a dangerous sort of direction we're taking. But I would like to go back to your initial question about what is the main ethical challenge. I think the main ethical challenge, or one of them anyhow, is that we are moving towards a world where things are just going in a direction of what is possible rather than in a direction where we all agree is desirable. So it would be advantageous if we could have a discourse in society where we consciously agree this is the direction we would like to take, including regulation, including proactive legislation, and then implement that. At the moment, technology is running very fast.
Well, is it possible for us to keep up with this? I hear all the time that the technology is faster than we are, and it's becoming even more. It's becoming even faster. So how are we supposed to keep up with the changes and have this discourse if we can't even keep up with the speed at which the technology is changing?
Can I just jump into this?
Sure.
I think the challenges that we've heard in the previous talks, we've heard a lot of explanations about there are things that AI can do and there are things that AI can't do. And the biggest ethical problem for me is applications that are inappropriate. So there's a difference. I love my Spotify recommender algorithms a lot because over the years they got to know me and they do recommend quite interesting music to me. But those kinds of systems, they're inherently probabilistic. So when they're accurate, when a system is very accurate and can identify your personality, your traits, your desires, it's very privacy invasive. But even systems that are highly, highly accurate, systems that are accurate in over 99% of cases, which is an insanely high success rate, they make errors. And if we apply the same systems we use for recommender system for music to identify terrorist suspects, that's where ethical dilemmas arise. And in 2005, the Snowden revelations showed that the NSA is using machine learning in Pakistan to use they apply machine learning to phone metadata to identify terrorist suspects.
Right.
And the argument here was, even if you have an error rate of 0.008%, that's 15,000 people in Pakistan.
Right.
So this is not, it's not that the technology is wrong, it's that there are application cases where errors are have such severe consequences and are so unpredictable that we maybe don't want the technology there.
Though I think that it's important to consider what the alternative is, right? So I completely agree that technology is probabilistic and there are no models that are perfectly accurate. And I think that everyone intuitively understands that there's no judgments that could ever be perfectly accurate. But we have to remember that humans also make inaccurate judgments all of the time. And let's talk about domain that maybe it's closer to people that are sitting here in the audience, like recruitment. Or, well, if you go for a job interview, you expect that you will be judged just based on how good you are at the task that the job you're applying for requires you to excel at. Now, in fact, we know very well that people who interview, people who judge you, will judge you on your race, age, gender, tattoos, whether you have them or not, your dress, and so on. So all of those things are completely not important in excelling at the job you're applying for. Now, those people basically make mistakes as well. We call it racism, we call it sexism, we call it ageism. Now, using algorithms and trying to supplement or maybe even replace some of those racist, ageist, and sexist decisions that people make with algorithms that are not perfect, but we know that are getting more accurate than humans as we speak at the moment, can actually bring us towards the world that is more fair and less prejudiced.
So in other words, they're making us better human beings.
However, here's the challenge. Humans are awful in making decisions, and hiring is an excellent example, and identifying terrorist suspects or criminals on the street is a good one as well. The only issue is that one is scale. At CeBIT, I went to a facial recognition tool. Those are applied to decide whether people can enter certain spaces or not. If you apply these to thousands of people, of course errors occur, but the burden of proof lies on the person who doesn't get access to a stadium, doesn't get access across a border. The burden of proof lies on you to say that you're not a suspect, that you're innocent. That's the first issue. And the second one is, human decision-making is also opaque, right? We often don't know why a certain hiring decision has been made. But if you have hiring systems that are systematically biased, it's often very difficult to identify where exactly the bias originates from. So,
what's an example of that?
and this is not inherently true. It depends on what kind of complexity you built into the system. But with ever more complexity, it doesn't matter whether the machine makes the decision or only gives information. when we don't understand whether an error has occurred, and in case of discrimination, this is even illegal activity has occurred, this becomes very problematic for laws to apply.
I completely agree with you. I think that the decision to refuse you access to anything should not be based just on your face. But now it's not the decision of the algorithm to refuse you access or not. It's the decision of the human operator. And what algorithm can help you is actually can help you to not use a kind of just a proxy for, I don't know, you being a dangerous person or an unreliable person of the face. Let me give you a practical example. So in Washington State in the US, we had a situation where the policymakers realized that credit scores are being used in giving people jobs. And the policymaker thought, this is outrageous. How can we use credit scores in deciding whether to hire someone or not? So they made a very well-meant decision to ban use of credit scoring in hiring decisions. Now, what the outcome of this action was, that because the human employer did not have an algorithm to tell him, hey, this person is reliable or not, they have fallen back on racist and ageist and sexist human approach to solving this problem. So basically, there's a lot of evidence that banning using credit scores in hiring people resulted in now employers avoiding minorities and avoiding people who has never worked before because they basically judge them by whatever they could see on the surface. And also, like, I completely agree with you that bias is awful and we should try to get rid of it. But the advantage of algorithms is that while they're really complex, that's true, at the end of the day, we can study them way more easily than study humans. Humans are also really complicated. So I believe that going forward, we can easily correct the algorithms. And as our history shows, it's very difficult to correct humans when it comes to things like racism, sexism, or profiling people just based on their faces.
I would slightly contest the easily, fix the algorithm question, just because if you use machine learning, as you will know, actually a lot of it is really just a black box. And even though you might be a specialist, you cannot actually sort of trace back an individual classification outcome to a particular sort of input point that can simply be fixed, such that if you fix that little, flip that bit, everything will be fine. So the bias question is actually a special instance of the lack of transparency problem that we have with these machine learning models. Now, what I'm really worried is not the individual AI module. What I'm really worried about is if you cascade such modules and you combine automated individual systems, you may get completely unpredictable and uncontrollable overall behavior. And therefore, I don't think machines will take over in this sort of science fiction movie way. Not at all. But what is very likely to happen is that just out of financial concerns, humans will be taken out of the loop. Machine learning algorithms may be cascaded across company boundaries. You mentioned credit scoring algorithms and how they suddenly might be used for something else. And the people who use that score, they don't even know how the other side calculated that. If you do know how these scores get calculated by the very few providers out there, you will know that they consider, for example, where you live. So if you live in the wrong place, you might actually not get a mortgage because you are surrounded by people who are poorer than you and have maybe a sort of a liability issue. So I'm worried about the complexity.
I completely agree with that, but the fact of life is that if you're born in a wrong place today, you're also not getting a mortgage, right, whether you like it or not. And look, I don't like it, that this is a fact. Now, using the algorithms actually gives some of the people living in the zip code that is wrong, gives them a chance of getting the mortgage. Credit scoring in the Washington state gave some people from the minorities. And look, the world is not fair, and I'm like first to admit it, and I think it's awful. But I think that basically using of those machine learning decision models that we are not fully comprehending it, and this is a big problem. But basically we're seeing when we deploy them in practice is that they're improving on whatever was there before, right? So it's a bit like, look, there are many medicines that we completely don't know how they work. Science tries to explain how the medicine works, and we just don't understand it. I'm the first to admit it would be way better if we were able to understand how this particular medicine works. But should it mean that let's stop using this medicine to treat whatever disease it's treating just because we don't understand how it works? No, it means let's be cautious and let's have those conversations like we have today, but let's still use the tools that are improving people's lives.
I think there's another dimension to this. We often talk about intelligent systems making decisions, but it's not just decision-making, it's also creating knowledge and information. A lot of smart devices that are equipped with powerful AI are also equipped with powerful sensors that collect ever more data about us. Again, in principle, that's not a problem. But the moment these technologies are used to make very intimate inferences about me, accuracy, and I think there cannot be perfect accuracy, there's always going to be a bias, becomes a very important issue. Even until this date, on some database somewhere, I might be classified as unreliable. On some database somewhere, data bought by some advertiser, I might be classified as somebody who's lazy, who's not intelligent, who's neurotic. And this is not a question about is AI good or bad. I think the moment AI is used in business models that thrive from selling personal data, this becomes inaccurate information becomes very problematic. There's of course data protection regulation, but even right now, I wouldn't even know who to complain to. I don't even know who are all data brokers that currently have information about me, and what kind of information do they hold about me.
So it's a problem of concentration and aggregation of the information held, and
So-
the lack of recourse.
Exactly, but it's not a question, it's not about automation. It's about a new way in which information and intelligence is gathered about people, which may or may not be accurate and is happening in very opaque ways and often without the consent of users. And we still think about data privacy as clicking on a Facebook ad, whereas when we move about a world in which we're surrounded by AI systems, so sort of distributed AI, this is happening on a constant basis. The advertisement billboard can read my emotions, whether this is correct or not, and then base certain decisions or show me certain things in my environment.
I'm really surprised, in fact, that you coming from Privacy International, you would actually be worried by the fact that sometimes the information is inaccurate. Because I think that, it's actually a pretty good thing for privacy that those algorithms do not know us so well still. Now, I think they're getting better, but obviously they're wrong very often.
What we like to say is it's Big Brother when it's accurate and it's Kafkaesque when it's not. So it's a dual problem, and I think it is important to point out that we have these two problems and not play them against each other.
That's a very good point. Any questions from the audience? Anyone have any questions about that? We've got one over here to the right. It's Big Brother when it's right. It's Kafkaesque when
It's wrong.
it's wrong. It's fantastic. Go ahead.
Hello. I have a question about the relevance of privacy in principle as a right to be protected or not. And at least there is a group out there which says that this is an increasingly irrelevant or outdated notion. We are already living in a post-privacy society. And in a way, we have to acknowledge this in a positive way. Let me give you one example and phrase it as a question. How else do you explain that according to a recent survey, the most happiest people on the planet live in Norway, a country where the government publishes a list of all citizens, how much they make, money, salary-wise, and how much taxes she pays?
I think it's mostly because of dating. You can much easily if you know how much other person is earning. That's at least what I heard from a Norwegian person. So it's not about privacy so much as the dating world.
Would you like to read out your browsing history to this panel and show me your phone? No, I think what this boils down to, privacy is about control. It's about compartmentalizing your life. There are certain things you happily share with your doctor that you don't want to share with your employer.
Right.
And there are cultural differences in the way we construct these boundaries and the way we navigate them. And I think if you understand privacy in that way, it's very far from dead. And a lot of people care very much about their privacy because it allows you to keep certain things separate from other people. and I think we do this on an everyday basis, and we have contextual expectations of privacy. When I sit in a restaurant and I talk to somebody sitting in front of me, I don't expect this to be blurted out to everybody around me, and I don't expect this to be recorded, to be searched, and to be used to make inferences about me.
And when you send an email to someone?
I don't expect privacy when I send an email. But that doesn't mean that we don't have a right to privacy, that we don't have the right to not share certain information.
What is the definition, though, of privacy changing? We've been talking all week about how we've got a generation now that is going from analog to digital, and that we've got children now growing up who know nothing but the world of where everything about you is online. So is our definition then, does it have to change?
Even if there are studies, I unfortunately can't cite them on the top of my head, but especially in the US, young people are the ones who delete cookies, for instance. Young people are very well aware about compartmentalization. They want to hide things from their parents. They want to hide things from their teachers. That's very much in the interest of young people.
Mm-hmm. So you don't think the definition is going to change?
Well, actually, I agree with the gentleman there that basically the privacy as we know it at the moment is gone. Mm-hmm. So that's true that if you go somewhere to the middle of the forest and you leave your smartphone in your car far away, you may have a conversation with someone that other people won't know about. But when it comes to your political views, your sexual orientation, your religiosity, how much money you earn, and all of the other aspects of our lives that we traditionally like to keep private, and also that are really important from the point of view not only of our well-being or not getting creepy advertisement, but in fact, when you go to countries that are less liberal than what we're used to in the Western world, lack of privacy understood as people knowing my political views or people knowing my sexual orientation is really a matter of life and death. Think about Saudi Arabia, for instance, where being an atheist is basically a capital offense awaiting for you for that. Now, this type of privacy, I completely agree, is totally gone. And I think that society is actually, we are distracted by trying to talk about, hey, let's introduce this law or that law, or introduce this new technology that will protect our privacy a bit more. I'm all for it, and I'm not happy that the privacy is gone. But I think the sooner we accept the fact that the privacy is gone and is not going to be there in the future, and start discussing the issues related to how we should organize the societies and cultures and the law in such a way as to make the post-privacy world a safe and nice place to be, the better for all of us.
So we should perhaps distinguish, coming back to the audience question of the gentleman, whether the fact that some people don't value their privacy is the same thing as whether, in general, people should not have the right to make that choice, right? So I agree, privacy is eroded, or being eroded as we speak, but this does not mean that the value should not be there in the same way that human rights cannot be talked away, right? If I believe there is a right to life, I don't want this to be redefined by saying, you know, if you have a certain faith, ethnicity, skin color, you know, you're not a human or you don't have that right. So we easily attack such a position nowadays because we've learned from a sad past, our sad past. Now, the same should happen around privacy. So the fact that privacy is eroded is a sort of de facto observation, but this has no impact on privacy as a value, as an individual right. And coming back to the Norway question, I think a lot of the Norwegians' happiness might be more related to their oil fund than the fact that their government is giving the data away.
Yeah, it helps to have an oil fund. All right, we've got a question here, this woman here. Any more questions?
Can I just add a tiny thing to the previous point?
Sure, go ahead.
Privacy has never been more under threat, but there also have never been greater opportunities for privacy. And I think bold statements like privacy is over are not helpful because they ignore that there are a lot of interesting, relevant policy debates happen that are highly relevant to your ability to protect your privacy. Think about encryption. Strong encryption is important. If you are able to encrypt, you are able to construct spaces in which you can preserve your privacy. Mm-hmm. It's not a law of nature. This is a policy decision that we can make or not make.
Mm-hmm. Good point.
Is there any way to regulate artificial intelligence in a way to avoid malicious mass manipulation, or let's call it harmful use of private data? I'm thinking about Cambridge Analytica, for instance.
Well, I think this is a space that is extremely difficult to regulate, data in general, because first of all, data knows no borders. It can be very easily moved between countries and between jurisdictions. So what's illegal in one country, you can do in another country relatively easily. Another problem is that it's very difficult to see whether someone's data was stolen or misused. If someone steals your money or steals your car, it disappears from your driveway or your bank account. If someone steals your data, you wouldn't even know that the data got stolen. Finally, when you regulate things, you have to use some kind of legal definition of what you want to regulate. So let's say we have very good laws, in fact, in Europe, for instance, that regulate how much information I can store about individuals and how, what are the rules related to this storage. I cannot, for instance, collect and store data about your sexual orientation without your knowledge. But now, if your Spotify playlist of your Facebook likes or your tweets, even if you never mentioned anything related to your sexuality, become a very good signal that a computer algorithm can turn into a prediction of your sexual orientation with extreme accuracy. Now, basically what it means is that all of those types of signals become information about your sexual orientation. But now saying, okay, so let's just shut it all down. Let's just shut down Google and Facebook and Twitter and so on. Just people are not going to accept that, right? We kind of like those toys and like those technologies. They're not only making our lives more pleasant and fulfilling, but also safer and longer and healthier. So I basically feel that there's slowly no going back. So instead of trying to say, hey, let's just try to keep protecting certain pieces of information that we cannot protect. And also you can regulate Google, you can regulate Facebook, you can regulate Microsoft. But can you regulate this student in his dorm room with a laptop that can just buy some data or collect it from publicly available sources like Twitter and then turn it into a very accurate prediction of something? Now, this guy would be very difficult to regulate. So I would argue that, again, the sooner we accept we just can't really regulate it and go into worrying about consequences and thinking about how to solve the problems that it creates, the better for all of us.
Go ahead.
That's an excellent question. Again, I think we have to compartmentalize and look at different problems and different solutions. The biggest challenge, and I absolutely agree with you, is the ability to predict sensitive information from seemingly mundane data. If you think about European, a lot of data protection law relies on distinctions of data that are becoming increasingly blurry. What is personal, what is non-personal, what is sensitive, what is not. That being said, I think there are opportunities when we're moving towards a world of the Internet of Things. A lot of the data protection, data collection is going to increase exponentially. And there we have a situation where there's also, the previous day was a lot about cybersecurity and security challenges, where devices with sensors that collect massive amounts of data are also extremely insecure at the moment. And you can make an argument that it might be good for security to have a certain amount of data minimization in the infrastructures that surround us. So I think giving up on all of these problems just because they're hard is too easy. And I think, especially in the Internet of Things, there are great arguments to be made to just reduce the amount of data that are being collected.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you say it is hard to enforce, the fact that you can't just use sensitive information is, for example, the reason why the Information Commissioner in the UK is investigating Cambridge Analytica. I'm not sure what they will find, but there are rules, and even though they're hard to enforce, they are currently being investigated.
Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that it's hard. I'm saying that it's basically impossible. So, look, guys, I hate hurricanes. I think they're really bad for us. They should not happen. They kill people. They destroy property. And we should make them illegal totally tomorrow. But would us making hurricanes illegal stop them from coming?
Well,
no, not at all. They're just going to keep coming. And the better we try to think about how to insure property and work on like emergency services that are going to insure us against the outcomes of the hurricane, the better for all of us.
It's a bit of a difficult comparison, though, isn't it? Because it's not a natural force. So all this work is actually done by companies. These companies are legal entities, often in multiple jurisdictions. So if we do create laws, companies will have to adhere to them because it will be reputational damage incurred, fines incurred if they violate that. And they can be investigated. They don't want bad press. So it's actually also up to us as citizens, as a purchaser of their services, whether we're acting, as a company, as an individual. We control what kind of company we purchase from. And if we value privacy, then actually we may, buy from one vendor that has a particular outlook and gives maybe some guarantees, and maybe not somebody else who's sort of hoarding a lot of data with a few controls in place.
I agree that Google will try to comply with privacy laws, but would ISIS try to comply with privacy laws?
I think
I don't think so.
The recent revelations about CIA hacking and surveillance are quite interesting in this context. Because also in surveillance, you can say, if you're a high-profile suspect, the NSA will find ways to surveil you, or take the BND or any other large intelligence agency. What we can do, however, is we can make blanket surveillance harder. And the reason why the CIA is now trying to hack into phones is that apparently they can't collect the data on a blanket scale. So again, too easy to say it's not a hurricane, it's a man-made problem, and we have multiple ways to regulate it. And I think one of the best ways is to make invasions, make surveillance and make privacy invasions more difficult and more costly, so that they will only be applied in cases where you're a high-profile target.
So one thing that we have not done yet on this panel, and I think it kind of has to do with the overall topic, is we haven't actually distinguished three areas, namely law, regulations, and ethics.
Well, we have regulations coming up next.
Yes, but just to point out that they're not the same thing, right? So if I'm talking about the ethics, I'm actually talking about what is the morally right thing to do. And people can have different opinions on that. They can base their opinions based on different ethical frameworks in moral philosophy. Like the famous car example, in the previous session, somebody said, how do we make sure if there's an elderly couple and a pregnant lady that the driverless car doesn't kill the pregnant lady? Right. I think this implies a certain ethic utilitarianism that has been very much criticized for its lack of protection of minorities in philosophy. So this is the ethical side. What is morally the right thing? And you mentioned it earlier, certain applications we should not do, right? Nobody may stop us, but we can say, no, I'm not going to do that. Just to point out this obvious option that doesn't get mentioned a lot. Then the second is regulation. Regulation means that a certain amount of force is delegated by governments to an industry, and they can basically come up with rules that are proposed and adhere to these rules, and they get fined if they violate these rules, in a sort of efficiency oriented process. And then there's the legal process, which is seen as a sort of last recourse, and they somewhat overlap, but they're not the same thing, right? So there's a lot of stuff that's actually allowed by the law and by regulation that's still morally completely wrong. And likewise, there are things that are probably forbidden, that sometimes somebody needs to do to be a morally righteous person.
And that's a great segue into our next panel discussion, too, because we're out of time. But yeah, we could easily talk for another hour about this. Let's give them a round of applause. Excellent discussion on the ethical issues. Thank you very much. Thank you. And now I think we're going to play musical chairs. We're going to ask our next three panelists to come up and take a seat here. Thank you very much. It was a really good discussion. Thank you, guys.